Cereal Box presents Remade. Season 2, Episode 7. Chosen One. Written by Andrea Phillips. Narrated by Laurel Schroeder. Ask it again, Inez said, as if the last 3 rounds had just been for practice. May appreciated that dogged persistence in theory, but in practice, it was a bit much. From the look of it, Jingwei was coming to the same conclusion. Inez, proper noun, synonym for a bit much. Or maybe an anagram of that, if you were feeling harsh. May knew this doppelganger of Jingwei wasn't the same person as her old friend, that they hadn't woken up on a space station together. Still, she couldn't help but feel that kinship. It was like a phantom limb, only nothingness where a friendship should be. It ached at moments like these, when Jingwei quirked an eyebrow at her, as if asking, "Can you believe some people?" Out loud, though, Jingwei only said, "Sparky said Sanctuary is dangerous, and your friends are in trouble, but we're never going to get a clear answer about what that means, exactly. Trust me, I've tried." She crouched on her heels, drawing lines in the ground with a knobby stick, looking for all the world like none of this was important to her. Come to think of it, maybe it wasn't. "What kind of danger are they in?" Inez persisted. "Is it caretakers?" Jingwei shook her head. "I don't think so," she said. She squinted at Sparky, like the answer might come into better focus that way. "That's not what it's like when he talks about the unbuilders." The caretaker was motionless, parked well away from the kids and half hidden by trees, as if any of them could forget it was there. May was exquisitely aware of every sound it made, every tiny gesture. 10 minutes ago, something on it had whirred, like a camera lens focusing, and Saya had jumped like a hand grenade had dropped in her lap. Other people seemed to be coming to terms with the caretaker's presence a little more easily, though. Hiram chewed on his lip, wide-eyed. "What's he saying?" "The dangerous part is the place?" Jingwei shrugged with one shoulder and tossed the stick down. "I don't know anything about your friends, but Sparky's about to have some kind of coronary over there. He's convinced we need to get your buddies away from that sanctuary place pronto. So we can either go and help them, or you can decide I'm full of it and let whatever happens to them happen." She rose, gawky and angular, like a collapsible measuring stick. "If you believe me, and you want to hear what Sparky thinks we should do, I'll be here. But if all you're going to do is argue with me," and here she looked Inez dead in the eye, "then maybe you should just stop talking and let me go back to my camp in peace." "Fine," Inez said. "It's this way." She turned and stomped ahead, expecting that Jingwei would just follow her. She thrashed branches out of her way a lot harder than strictly necessary, too. Typical. Jingwei rolled her eyes, but slouched after Inez anyway. Hiram and Alex exchanged a look and followed too, Talon swooping above them. So May figured she'd better go along and keep an eye on things. "We have to go save them," Hiram told Inez. "We have to go now." He'd been quieter than a mouse on the trip out, probably upset about Jingwei leaving them again. But he'd started in on this practically as soon as they'd left Jingwei and Sparky, alone together in their shunning shack, as May thought of it. With every step that left Jingwei farther behind, he'd become even more high-pitched and insistent. He skipped faster every few steps to keep up with Inez's brisk gait, but she kept breezing right by him. Talon glided overhead, keeping a close watch as Hiram grew progressively more agitated. "You think she's telling the truth?" Inez scoffed. "You have to admit it's a lousy story. She doesn't even know what she's supposed to be scaring us with." "But what if it's true?" Hiram stepped in front of Inez to stop her. May was startled at his boldness. Apparently, Hiram was too. He continued, a little softer now. "We don't have any reason to think she's lying to us." "Except the caretaker." Inez's nostrils flared, and her voice grew louder. Temper. Alex moved closer to Hiram, protective, and Helen landed beside him. Inez went stiff at that and stepped back. May could all but see the steam coming out of her ears, all but hear her counting to 10 to calm down. Even if she's telling the truth, May said, Holden and the Ryecatchers probably got to Sanctuary ages ago. So if there is anything dangerous there, they've probably either dealt with it already and they're on their way back, or they're... But the word hung heavy over all of them. Dead. It wasn't any different than the day before, or the week before. From the moment the two groups had gone their separate ways, May knew the explorers had entered a Schrodinger's cat situation they might never come out of again. So they could be dead. They could have died a week ago, or a month ago. No matter what plans and codes and rendezvous points they'd set up, the cold truth was that they might never meet again. The ones who stayed might never know what happened either. But the texture of not knowing seemed different all of a sudden. Before, the danger was hypothetical. Maybe they'd fall off a cliff or run into a malevolent herd of murder robots. Or maybe they'd eat a bunch of poisonous berries. Any of those things could happen at any moment. The idea that the place they were going was dangerous in and of itself, though, that had always been a possibility. But now that someone had said so out loud, it took on a new weight. The knowledge hung heavy on May's shoulders and slowed her steps. When they reached home, they joined Gabe, Amelia, and Sebastian around the campfire, now just a smoldering heap of ash. Hiram took a branch and stirred the coals. Through some magic, the fire leaped back to life. Like Jingwei had. Inez surveyed the scene, her lips pressed together. Finally, "We should all stick together, no matter what," she said. "So let's take a vote. And if we go to find the others, we all go. If we stay, we all stay. I'll start off. I think we should stay put. I don't think we should endanger ourselves or our plans because some caretaker's shill says we should." Sebastian shook his head. The ones who went to Sanctuary were mostly the strongest of us. The ones who would be the best in a fight. If they got into a jam they couldn't get themselves out of again, how would it help for us to show up and get murdered too? Alex nodded agreement. "No go," he said, soft. Amelia bit her lip and looked from face to face. "I can't decide," she said. "Pass?" Gabe lowered his head. "They'd come for us if they heard we were in trouble," he said. "I think we should go." May looked at him sidelong, then bumped him with her shoulder. "Me too." "Me 3, Hiram added. No surprise there. May was pretty sure Hiram would have risked his life to save 8 rocks arranged like a smiley face. "Saya?" Inez looked to her. "You haven't said anything, and it's 3-3 unless Amelia makes up her mind." A breeze blew through camp, smelling of damp and of green growing things. "We should go," Saya said at last. "I couldn't live with myself if something happened to Holden, and I didn't do anything to help." Inez scrubbed her fingers through her hair. "Fine," she said, curt. "Then we'll go. Hiram, go tell Jingwei. The rest of us will start to pack up what we need. We'll set out in the morning." They didn't have many mementos of the people they'd lost along the way, but Inez kept that caretaker arm, as if it were the last fragile string tying her to Teddy. And May still had the calendar Wesley had made so long ago. That notched stick. He and Jingwei had been the most like her, and Wesley's calendar project had helped her to start feeling like she understood where she was, back at the beginning of all this. After Wesley was killed, she'd guarded that calendar faithfully at every step, even through the rush to leave Arcadia, and everything that had come since. If this was the only mark Wesley left on this world, then she couldn't bear to see it erased. She notched another day in it. "What's the date?" Gabe asked, seated next to her at the fire. "It's May 9th, she said. "We've been here for about half a year now." She stood up to pace. Gabe put a hand on May's wrist and pulled her to sit down again. "Stay a while," he said. "It's getting too dark to do any more work." She flushed, still unaccustomed to such casual touch, but nonetheless sank down next to him, and put her head on the perfectly sized space between his chin and his collarbone. "Ah, I finally caught you," he said. His voice rumbled in her ear, and she giggled in spite of herself. "I thought you caught me in Arcadia." "I did too," he said. "But you're like a scared pigeon. Every time I get close, you flutter a few feet further." "That's ridiculous," May said. But even as she objected, she realized he was right. She almost pushed away and sat up. But instead, she closed her eyes and listened to Gabe breathing, to his heartbeat. It was nice. They just fit together, like puzzle pieces, like it had been planned out in advance. His arm rested around her, and everything seemed warm and wonderful. But May couldn't quiet a little voice in the back of her head, digging, poking, looking for errors in everything she did. It needed certainty. It needed direction and purpose. Where, the voice wondered, was all this going? May needed to take some tests before she could go to kindergarten. Her mother had explained to her very carefully that the school wanted to see how much May had learned already. They would probably ask about shapes, letters, numbers. They might ask her to do some drawing, or maybe play with some toys. Her mother also added the same warning she did whenever May was coloring or reading out loud. "Do your best, May, but don't worry about being perfect." May wasn't so sure. She was nervous and a little scared, because she couldn't always remember which direction was the B and which was the D, and because she argued with her friend Natalia sometimes about whether her little brother's toy car was more red or more orange. "I might not know everything," she told her mother. "You're not supposed to," her mother said and laughed. "That's why you go to school, so you can learn all the things you don't know already." But May didn't like not knowing things already. She kicked her booster seat and worried even harder. Once they got to the school, they had to wait for their turn in a big, bright room with giant windows. May fidgeted a little in the plastic chair. She stared at the tiles in the ceiling, counting how many went across in each direction. It was 10 and 14, not counting the funny ones at the edges that were smaller. Could she work out how many tiles there were in all? There was a trick to multiplying by 10. Her father had taught her. What was it? She squeezed, then shut her eyes, to keep herself from cheating and counting all the tiles too soon. To multiply by 10, she had to put a 0 at the end of the other number. And a 14 with a 0 at the end was 140. She opened her eyes again and tried to count to see if she was right, but she had trouble keeping track around the lights. "All right, we're ready for May," said the test person, a man with curly gray hair and a very fat belly. May wasn't sure what his name was. Nobody had thought to tell her. "Let's go, May." Her mother tugged at her hand. May followed along obediently, but looked back over her shoulder. "Mommy, does 10 times 14 make 140? May asked. "Yes, it does," her mother said. The test person looked surprised, like maybe he hadn't known that was the answer. "Why did you want to know?" he asked May. She explained about the ceiling tiles and the lights. He looked up, and May could tell he was counting too. "Huh," he said. "How about that?" He patted May on the head. "I can see we have a bright one here." The tests were fine after all. May was good at them, and she knew she was good at them. She put the wooden blocks in size order quickly. She looked at pictures and figured out how they went together to show how to make a sandwich, or how to get ready to go outside in the rain. She struggled a little to cut with scissors, because she wasn't ever allowed to use them at home. "This is my first time," she said, her voice very small, just like her. "Am I doing all right?" "You're fine," said the test person. He smiled, and then asked her to play a few funny games with him about making patterns. They were easy, but May liked winning, so she didn't mind. Finally, the man sent May back into the room with the 140 ceiling tiles to wait while he talked to her mother in private. She could hear their voices through the door, even though they were trying to talk quietly. You must know already that your child is very academically gifted, said the man. You really have something special on your hands. Yes, said her mother. She sounded tired. We don't want to pressure her, though. She puts a lot of pressure on herself already. The test person made a funny clucking sound with his tongue. May tried to copy it, but stopped so she could hear what he was saying instead. May is going to be a trailblazer, he said. She has so much potential. It's your responsibility to make sure she makes the most of herself. It's my responsibility to make sure she lives a good, happy life, May's mother said. She sounded annoyed, like she did when May kept interrupting her in the bathroom. She's not a gift to the world. She's only a child. In the car on the way home, May thought about whether or not she was a gift to the world. Or a trailblazer. She wasn't sure what that was, but she really liked the sound of it. Is everyone ready? Inez asked. She scrutinized each of them in turn. It was so much like the way May's mother had checked her over before a field trip that May almost patted her pockets to check for her phone and epinephrine injector. They weren't there, of course. Though, as always, May would have felt a heck of a lot better if she had both of them close at hand. She shivered, and Gabe absently rubbed her back. Inez didn't look content exactly, but she settled her backpack more securely on her shoulders. Fine, lead the way, she told Jingwei. Jingwei nodded and then turned to Sparky. Without a word, Sparky set off. Reluctantly, the kids trudged after him. Except May. She stood in place, staring at the direction the caretaker was headed, trying to match it up with what she knew, what she remembered. Stop! That's the wrong way, May called. The kids turned around to stare at her. What are you talking about? Sebastian asked. He sounded a little snippy. Probably because he wouldn't be able to sneak off with Amelia as easily on a long journey. That's not the way to Sanctuary. May coughed apologetically. I memorized the map before Holden left. I thought one of us should know where they went, just in case. In case something like this happened, she thought. Saya snorted. Of course you did. But Inez looked from Sparky to May to Jingwei and back again. Show us what you memorized. May picked up a stone and squatted. It was like this, she said. She traced out a rudimentary map. The mountains here, the rivers there, an X for Niagara, and, off to the side, another X for Sanctuary. Inez narrowed her eyes and turned on Jingwei. Where exactly are you taking us? I thought we were going to Sanctuary, Jingwei said, bewildered. I swear, that... Sparky walked over and stuck its wooden peg leg at a spot on the map, off to the side. We haven't even left camp, and you're already lying to us. Inez looked about ready to pick another fistfight with Sparky, no matter how badly it had gone for her the first time. Jingwei and Sparky seemed to be having a conversation of sorts. The girl looked at the machine. I don't get it, buddy. Why are you showing me extra robot arms and shit? Weapons, Amelia guessed. Like Inez's extra claw. I bet Sparky wants to take us somewhere to get weapons first. May blinked at her. That sounds like a good idea, actually. Jingwei squinted at Sparky and then thumped the machine's chassis. I think that's right, she said. What kinds of weapons? Inez asked, suspicious. Caretaker parts. Jingwei squinted at Sparky. Like claws? Maybe sharp blades. Oh, there might be cutting lasers, too. Maybe rivet guns like Loki had. Saya looked from Inez to Sparky and back again. Jingwei nodded. Yeah, that too. May glanced sidelong at Inez, half expecting the girl to kick up some kind of fresh, hot fuss about this unexpected change in plans. Instead, Inez put her hands on her hips and grinned, fierce. Well, all right then, she said. That's what I'm talking about. By now, May reflected, their ragtag group of teenagers were seasoned travelers of this world. They'd gone through jungle and forest, cities and ruins of cities, Mountains, plains. Some of the terrain was familiar, but never quite familiar enough. It was like listening to a conversation in a language where you only knew 10 words. Trees and grass? Yes, fine. But not trees with leaves shaped like perfect hexagons. Not grass that smelled like burning plastic when you stepped on it. And some things were strange through and through, presumably the work of caretakers. They passed by a field littered with cubes of rubber, each roughly a meter per side. There was a sweep of perfect, uncracked concrete, easily the size of an airport parking lot, with a giant sphere levitating in the center. The orb glowed and shifted colors like a lava lamp, crimson to cobalt and back again. Helen whined and tugged at Hiram's clothes to get him moving again when the boy stopped to watch it. They steered clear of that place, edging around the cement and walking until it was fully dark, putting a comfortable distance between the orb and them. Their route curved too, around the megastructure they saw on the horizon. It looked at first like the ruins of a city, broken spires glinting in the sun. But then it moved, parts flexing, rising and falling like it was a living thing. They could hear a faint rumble as the ground shook beneath it. "Holy shit," said Gabe. His fists bunched, as if he could fight it off. Once that first quick adrenaline burst of panic and fear passed, though, to her surprise, that she wasn't that concerned about the thing on the horizon. Whatever it was. There was a word for that feeling. What was it? She bit her lip, trying to remember, and it came to her along with a faint taste of blood. Fatalistic. An attitude of resignation regarding inevitable future events. If they were going to get squished or devoured by that thing, well, at least it would be over with quickly. After a few days, they stumbled on a wide ribbon of dark glass. May remembered something like this at the bottom of a stream in the ruined city by the space elevator. It was a road, probably, or maybe even a highway. This one hadn't been drowned or overgrown, but it hadn't survived time and neglect in one piece either. The road had buckled and broken in places, and there were gaps, steps, or long cracks every few hundred feet. "Sparky says this should bring us straight to where we're going," Jingwei said. "Just follow the black glass road, kids." She hesitated, then added, "If I understand right, anyway." She seemed a little more uncertain of anything Sparky told her, ever since the map incident. Or maybe she was wary of seeming to trust Sparky more than the other human kids. Not that May could blame her for that. Saya bent to test one of the broken edges, cut her finger, then swore, and stuck the injured digit in her mouth. "Step carefully," she said. "I think this thing could cut right through our shoes if we stepped wrong. Maybe even cut our toes off." In that case, maybe we should just walk next to the road," May said. "Yeah, that definitely seems safer," Inez agreed. "Let's keep moving." May relaxed. She'd braced for a fight. It seemed like just about everything was a fight lately. It was nice to find something everyone could agree on, even if it took something as uncontroversial as deciding that walking on literal broken glass was a bad idea. At night, May studied all of the others, and, more specifically, how they'd paired off to a greater or lesser degree. Saya and Inez were still dancing around, like nothing was going on between them, and she hoped they'd get over themselves soon, because the tension was driving everyone else up a wall. Sebastian and Amelia, on the other hand, were so open about being together that May wished they would try a little harder to keep private things private. Alex and Hiram had bonded over that ridiculous pet, and Inez had mentioned that she thought they were an item. It didn't seem in character for Hiram, but May couldn't deny that the two of them had been spending a lot of time together, ever since the Cumberbatch had shown up. May paused here and took a full minute to resent Loki for calling the thing something as ridiculous as Cumberbatches. And then she spent another full minute feeling guilty about thinking ill of a friend who might be in danger. Or dead. Her gaze turned to Jingwei, off on her own, distinctly segregated from the rest of the group. Jingwei and, well, Sparky. The caretaker's main eye gleamed red in the night, but the thing was otherwise motionless. Jingwei sat with her back against one of its legs, fidgeting with something small in her fingers. A piece of wire, maybe. And then there was her and Gabe. He wasn't sitting right next to her, for once, but he wasn't very far away. She moved to be closer to him, then burrowed under his arm like some nesting animal. It was too dark to make out anyone's face clearly, but she knew just what his would look like. A little surprised, a lot pleased. She rested her head on Gabe's chest and closed her eyes. She puzzled over how the pairs had happened so neatly in their group. When they'd been chosen to be remade, had the caretakers considered this? Romantic compatibility? If that were the case, she wondered if the caretakers had gotten Holden and Saya wrong, or Saya and Inez right. Jingwei had said they were all here for a reason, for a purpose. And that had to mean there was a reason for everything else, too. It wasn't May's plan, but she had to at least be following somebody's plan. A reason. "Penny for your thoughts?" Gabe asked. May knew she shouldn't ask. She knew it was a needy, manipulative, garbage person thing to say, but she had to get it out anyway. "Why do you like me?" He laughed, loud enough that Alex looked sharply toward them. "I like that there's no bullshit about you, May. No mind games. I always know exactly what to expect." She pulled away from him. "No, I mean it. Why me specifically? Is it just that there's nobody else to choose from, so you might as well?" "Why? Is that how you think about me?" It helped that she couldn't see his face. She didn't think she'd want to see it if she'd hurt him. "No, of course not," she said. "I'm just thinking, I guess, about why we're here and where all this is going." "Oh, stuck in your head again." The campfire popped and flared. May caught a shadowy glimpse of Gabe's eyes. He did look hurt. "I'm always stuck in my head," she said, quiet. "It's part of the package deal." He held her hand. "I know it," he said. "But for right now, let's just take what we have. And what we have is you and me, and a beautiful night, and all the stars in the universe. We don't need to worry about where all this is going. We've got our whole lives ahead of us." "Do we?" she wondered. But this time she kept her stupid mouth shut. Madison came into May's life and her class on the first day of November in the 3rd grade. Madison was frizzy-haired and blonde. She wore glasses and had knobby knees. She was placed in May's reading group, along with Jackson and Emma. And most important, she had allergies, just like May. May had never met anybody else who was allergic to a lot of things like she was. Weston was allergic to peanuts, and Peyton was allergic to dairy. But May had a list, and so did Madison. The evidence was clear. Just like May was special, Madison must be special too. And if May could be a trailblazer, then maybe she could team up with Madison to do even more together. So, at lunchtime on the 4th day of school, once May was sure it was a good plan, she asked Madison if she'd like to be best friends. Just like that. "Hey, Madison, do you want to be best friends?" Madison shrugged. "Sure," she said. "My big sister can make us friendship bracelets. Do you like to swim?" "Sure," May said. "I like to run, too, and I can run real fast." "Do you like Harry Potter?" "Sure," May said, even though she didn't really like Harry Potter all that much. No sense in jinxing her new best friendship right away. "Do you like Batsmaru?" "I don't know. What is it?" Madison asked. May bounced in excitement, her ponytail swaying behind her head. "Batsmaru is a penguin, except he's real cool, and he wears sunglasses, and I have a Batsmaru plushie I could show you at my house if you come over." Madison smiled. She was missing the same 3 teeth that May was missing. "That sounds like fun," Madison said. "I'll ask my dad if we can have a play date." When May's dad came to pick her up from the after-school program that day, and for weeks after, Madison was all May could talk about. She'd had friends before, and playdates. She'd had things in common with other kids, too. But she'd never before felt like someone else was the same as her, enough to really understand her. May hadn't realized how lonesome she was before she'd met Madison. And now that she knew, it was a stroke of good luck that she didn't have to be alone anymore. The next day, they finally ran into the first significant obstacle on their journey. And in retrospect, May kind of wondered why it had even taken this long. They crested a hilltop and found the trees ended abruptly, and only bare sand stretched forward, all the way to the edge of a mighty river. "Whoa," said Hiram. "There's so much water." He sounded a lot more miserable than a river strictly called for. May wondered what was up with that. Didn't they have rivers in Utah? This particular river, though, really was impressive. It was so broad, they could barely make out the trees on the other side. And the water was white-capped and furious, where it flowed around the few sprays of rocks. May tried to puzzle out its name. Was this the Mississippi? Or the Hudson, maybe? Once upon a time, in another life, she'd memorized vast amounts of geography for quizzes and challenges. But none of it had come up since the 6th grade, so most of that knowledge had eroded. But come to think of it, there wasn't much reason to believe this had to be one of the rivers she'd learned the name of. "How are we supposed to get across?" Inez asked. She glared at Jingwei. "Are we supposed to cross?" Jingwei didn't look at Sparky. She just stared at the other side of the river. "Yeah," she said. "Look." Alex pointed down the hill to the close edge of the water. "A bridge." It was almost accurate. There had been a bridge there once. The remains of the road, the glass highway, still led up to the bank of the river in a shimmering, graceful curve. But the rest was in ruins. May slid down the slope of sand and walked up to the shattered end of the road. It was broken away in clean planes, fringed with tarnished wire. Pylons still crossed the river, the water churning and breaking around those stone pillars. But each support was dozens of feet apart, much too far to jump. May had a sudden wild image of swinging from one to the next, like Tarzan, or maybe like Sunita. There were cables still hanging from the tops of the few arches that remained, but there was no way to retrieve them, even if the rest of the plan was feasible. "This is going to be a problem," Jingwei said. "Unless you're all expert swimmers." Inez scowled at the water. "Even if we were," she said, "that doesn't look safe." "Guess we turn downriver then, until we find somewhere else to cross," said Gabe. He shifted his backpack to ride higher on his shoulders. Sparky emitted a sound, a shrill, grating noise like microphone feedback. Sebastian shrieked, Saya jumped, and Alex darted 10 feet away before catching himself. Gabe jumped too, putting an arm in front of May's chest, the way her mom had sometimes acted like a makeshift seatbelt when she stopped the car a little too fast. "What the hell was that?" Gabe demanded. Jingwei looked as confused and upset as everyone else. "I don't know," she said. "He's never done that before." She paused for a moment, her face crinkled up like it did whenever she tried to understand whatever it was Sparky was doing inside her brain. "I think we have to cross here," she said at last. "Sparky says it's dangerous to go anywhere else. Or at least, I keep seeing a skull and crossbones." Inez shook her head vigorously. "This was a bad idea," she said. "We should turn back." "Turn back to Niagara?" May asked. "Or do you mean go straight to Sanctuary?" Inez threw her hands in the air. "Either one," she said. "I don't even care." Gabe cleared his throat. "We took a vote already, Inez. You want to take a new one every time something comes up? Maybe take another vote every morning. Make sure nobody changes their mind?" "No, but—" "Listen, we decided to make this decision as a group," Gabe said. "And we made the decision. It's done. Move past this." Inez's face was red, and her jaw worked a little. "You're right," she said at last. "You're right. I need to respect what we decided." "But we still need a way across the river," said Amelia. She nibbled on the end of one of her strawberry curls. You're sure we can't go somewhere else to cross? Jingwei shook her head. Sparky thinks that would be very, very bad, she said. That skull and crossbones. He means it. I've seen it before. She looked queasy. Hiram tipped his head to the side. Do any of you hear that? Hear what? Amelia asked. May closed her eyes and tried to focus on her ears. There was the sound of the river, of course, but at first there was nothing else. Finally, she recognized it. A whirring, industrial sound, like the background noise of a highway through the trees. It almost didn't register, since she'd spent so long huddling in the shadow of Niagara, the waterfall's white noise pressing against her ears, day and night. It's a machine, she said. There are machines nearby. So we need to hurry, Saya said. It could be caretakers. I'm sure we can figure it out, May said. They were here for a reason. A purpose. Surely they were up to the job. The caretakers wouldn't have picked them, out of all the people in all of history, if they hadn't thought they could get the job done. Sebastian rolled his eyes. What are we supposed to do? Sprout wings and fly? Nah. Jingwei grinned at him. But I think I have a plan. Jingwei's plan was typical Jingwei. As with all her favorite ideas, it involved a lot of heavy manual labor. They were going to build a raft. Or 2 rafts, or 3. Or maybe some other kind of boat. The specifics left a lot to be desired, to be honest. And even beyond the unbearable vagueness of Jingwei's raft-building notion, there were many potential pitfalls to this plan, and May couldn't help but enumerate them to herself. Though she'd learned by now to bite her tongue, unless the risk level had hit someone dies in the next 10 minutes. 1. There was the problem of putting everyone on a single, untested raft. 2. There was the problem of making a raft sturdy enough to last an entire crossing. 3. There was the whole issue of weight balance and steering. 4. Without life vests, what would they do if someone fell off? And all those problems were secondary to the biggest, most immediate problem. Where are we going to get logs to make rafts out of? She asked. That was a whole bundle of problems right there. For one thing, the trees were pretty far back from the water. And she had the vague impression that logging was dangerous work. Even if it wasn't, the knives and other tools they had weren't remotely up to being able to cut down a tree. Unless the trees turned out to be made of cheese or something, which, on reflection, would not have been the weirdest thing May had seen in the last 6 months. She had a new thought. And how are we going to hook the logs together? It's not like we left Arcadia with a bunch of nails and hammers. Leave the building plans to me, Jingwei said. I'm working on it. As for materials, she turned to Sparky. You got this, right? The caretaker didn't seem to reply. It just crept its stilt-legged way uphill to the nearest tree. A tall, straight thing. Some kind of pine tree, May thought. Or maybe cedar. The caretaker leaned up against the tree with 2 of its legs. A little like how a dog would stand up against a person. And then a tool deployed from the caretaker's chassis. May couldn't see it. The caretaker's body blocked her view. But she heard the high-pitched whine it made, and saw the sawdust spitting out in uneven plumes. Gabe blanched. That thing has a buzzsaw? May and Gabe exchanged an uneasy look. It was one thing to decide to trust Jingwei's creepy pet, as long as it hadn't shown murderous tendencies. But hearing that sound and seeing the damage gave May flashbacks. Jingwei, missing half her head. Teddy, bloodied, but full of determination. May's heart pounded hard in her throat, and she felt cold all over, like someone was holding her underwater. She gasped for air. If Sparky had equipment like that tucked away, the only thing keeping all of them alive was the fact that the machine hadn't chosen to murder them yet. For its own reasons. May wasn't sure whether to find that comforting. You okay? Gabe asked. He slid a hand around her waist. Fine, she snapped and shook him off. She wasn't like that. She didn't need some boy to comfort and complete her. She could weather these emotional storms on her own just fine. If you say so, Gabe murmured. He didn't try to touch her again, and somehow that made her feel even worse. Empty. She was broken out of her shame spiral by a loud, cracking noise. Sparky's tree fell through the branches of its neighbors. It caught at an angle, unable to fall completely to the ground. Sparky turned away and approached another tree. The buzzing started again, sending goosebumps all over May's skin. "What do we do about the first one?" Sebastian asked. "We have to get rid of all the little branches to get it free," Jingwei said. "I told Sparky we could take care of that." Inez set out toward the tree. "Let's get to work." The auditorium was far too air-conditioned. May was chilly, even in her cardigan, and envied the boys in their long pants and dress shirts. So unfair that she had to endure this ridiculous temperature with bare legs, because something fashion. Not to mention something sexism. But she would show them. This was the 8th grade honors night, and freezing calves or not, May knew she was poised to receive those honors like always. And not just her. Madison sat next to her, perched at the edge of her seat like a nervous little bird. Madison squeezed May's hand. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "Wonder Twin powers, activate," May whispered back. That was several layers of jokes piled on top of one another. Of course, they didn't look anything like twins, but they were close to inseparable, in school and out of it. May had even confessed in the 6th grade that she wasn't such a Harry Potter fan. But Madison was cool with it. She'd moved on to Doctor Who anyway. Their dads had started calling them the Wonder Twins, after a cartoon that neither girl had ever seen, until the dads showed them some clips they dug up on YouTube. And while they might not have superpowers, well, the honors would show the powers they did have. "May Psycho," called Principal Lowell. This was the Special Achievement in English award. May stood up to climb on stage and receive her plaque and certificate. Her shoes were a little too big, so she shuffled to keep from stepping right out of them. Principal Lowell kept talking. "Madison Silby," he called. Madison followed right behind May, like she always did. They each smiled for the photographer, and then they trooped back to their seats. Only to be called up again for special achievement in world languages, special achievement in mathematics, special achievement in science, special achievement in social studies, special recognition for overall academic achievement. They weren't completely identical, of course. May got medals for her white-hot winning streak in the debate club, plus a school citizenship award she hadn't even known existed until that moment. And Madison got special recognition for participating in the county's Youth Symphony Orchestra. By the time the night was over, the two of them could hardly juggle all their certificates and trophies. They giggled and hugged each other, honors scattering at their feet. "Are you ready for high school?" Madison asked. "As long as we're together," May said. "I'm ready for anything." May helped Jingwei strip the branches off the logs to make a better, smoother surface for them to sit on, while some of the other kids went foraging. "Did the caretakers ever tell you why they picked us?" May asked. "What do you mean, picked?" Jingwei wrinkled her nose. "A lot of people die on any given day, but the caretakers chose us to do whatever it is we're supposed to do, to bring humans back. So what's the special thing about us? Is it genes? Or abilities? Or—" "Oh." Jingwei straightened and looked thoughtful. "No, it's nothing like that. I talked to Pretty about this back on the space station. She was the best caretaker for explaining things. Way better than Sparky." May snapped another twig off the log. "Okay, and?" Jingwei waved her hands in an unhelpful motion. "The caretakers cast out a net in time, and they grabbed whatever they could get," she said. "And what they got was us. None of us was chosen, any more than you choose the special fish you're going to eat for dinner. You just take whatever Hiram's little dragon buddy happens to bring you that night." May froze in place. suddenly sick to her stomach. If none of them had been chosen, that meant none of them was special. Not even May. The wind rustled the trees. The river rushed by, on its way to the ocean. Jingwei snapped off another few twigs and tossed them into the pile, oblivious to the effect she'd had on May. "I need a bathroom," May mumbled, and hurried away into the trees, where nobody could see her flushed cheeks or burning eyes. If none of them had been picked for this job, maybe that meant they weren't up for it after all. She'd been confident that this mismatched group could learn to work as a team and overcome any obstacle. That they had been chosen for this task, and so they had to be capable of it. But now? Suddenly, horribly, May wasn't so sure. They'd been a gamble, and maybe they were a bad bet. Not good enough. And it meant that she and Gabe hadn't been chosen for each other. There wasn't anything particularly special about him, either. He was just some boy who liked her. May sank down onto a mossy boulder and put her face to her knees. Now what? Jingwei went through several different ideas for how to tie the logs together before striking on something that would work. They couldn't braid grass into ropes. The grass close by wasn't long enough or strong enough. She tied strips of bark, but those splintered and cracked instead of bending. The kids tried to hold the logs together with wooden pegs, too, but they were hard to shape, and with no glue, there was nothing to keep the logs from pulling apart again. In the end, they had to sacrifice Gabe's extra pair of pants from Arcadia to the cause, cutting them into long, thin strips and tying the raft together. The finished raft was uninspiring, like something from Tom Sawyer. Or was it Huckleberry Finn who'd had the raft? May couldn't remember anymore. It was just big enough for all of them, but that was the best you could say about it. "Moment of truth," Jingwei said. "We'll push it into the water, then hold it in place while everyone gets on. Sounds good?" Gabe did most of the work, since he was by far the strongest. Or at least, the strongest one who'd stayed with them, instead of heading off to Sanctuary. Inez put her shoulder into it too, and so did Hiram, while Talon circled their heads, squawking concern. It turned out that Talon was right to be concerned. The leading edge of the raft sank under the water instead of floating. "Is there a problem?" Sebastian asked. "Maybe it needs to be all the way in the water before the buoyancy kicks in," Jingwei said. "Keep going." The raft pusher struggled to get the raft further into the water. Finally, the thing was completely submerged, and still resting entirely on the bottom of the river. Gabe ran his wrist across his forehead to wipe away the sweat. "Hey, Jingwei, what kind of wood did you say this was?" Jingwei's brows were furrowed. "I don't know," she said. "I thought every kind of wood floated, but I'm not really a tree-studying person." "Botanist," May snapped. "Maybe every kind of wood floats where we're from, or when we're from, but who knows what's been done to these trees? Victims of pointless manipulation, just like the animals. Just like themselves, for that matter." "Ironwood doesn't float," Hiram said mournfully. "And sometimes old-growth pine doesn't either." "You couldn't have said something before now?" Sebastian snarked. "Great," Inez groaned. Hiram wilted and didn't say anything else. "We learned a lot from this, at least," Jingwei said. "We can use different trees and try again. The next build will go a lot faster. Pinky swear." "It'll go a lot faster tomorrow," Inez decided. "Take a break, everyone. I'll get the campfire fixed up. Hiram, keep Hot Wings here by the water. Maybe we'll be lucky, and he'll be in the mood to catch us some fish. The river will still be here tomorrow, when we're rested up." May stayed by the riverbank after everyone else had turned to other business, watching the water slowly pile sand into the crevices between the logs. It was as much proof as anyone could ask for that they weren't up to the job they'd been summoned for. Gabe came over after a little while. "You okay?" he asked. Why did he keep asking that? "You want to go and—" "I want to be alone," she said. Gabe was quiet for a minute. The river flowed by them endlessly, tirelessly. "Fine," he said at last. "Suit yourself." Ninth grade honors night went a little differently than May had expected. The auditorium was still cold, but a lot had changed over the course of the ninth grade. Next to her, Madison was nose-deep in her phone. She giggled and fidgeted in her seat, slouching farther down when "shh" erupted from all around them. "Who are you texting?" May whispered. "Nobody," Madison said absently. May endured the principal's speech with limited patience. It was always the same. Rewarding our best and brightest. Fulfilling potential. It's all thanks to the support of parents. She could probably deliver the same speech herself, if for some reason Principal Chen were struck down, and they needed someone else to do it. And then they got on with the actual honors part of the night. May twisted her hands in her lap until they called her name. She stood up and walked onto the stage, got her certificate and medal, smiled for the camera. Madison should have been right after her in alphabetical order. She always had been before. But not today. May filed back to her seat feeling light and untethered, like the ground had left her. "Madison?" she whispered. "Are you—" Madison didn't look up from her phone. "Oh," she said absently. "I've been really busy with orchestra, so my grades slipped." "But I thought you were—" May didn't know how to finish it. "I thought you were a good student. I thought you were doing well. I thought you were just like me." They hadn't had classes together this year. The perils of a big high school. But she hadn't thought that would change anything. Much less everything. "I thought you were better than that," she blurted. Madison turned scarlet. "Don't make a big deal out of it," she said. She looked up from her phone, just for a second, to glare at May. May's name was called again. She went up for her Earth Science Award. When she came back, Madison had slid away. After the ceremony, the other students flooded around her toward their parents and one another. But May stood still, juggling her certificates and medals, more than a little lost. Across the auditorium, Madison was trading hugs in a cluster of other orchestra kids. Madison had never been the hugging type with May. May made a beeline for them anyway. "Hey, Madison," she called. "Do you have a second?" One of the other girls put an arm around Madison's shoulders and glowered at May. Word got around fast, apparently. "What is it?" Madison asked. A certificate drifted to May's feet. "I just wanted to talk." Madison's gaze stuck to the fallen certificate. "You wanted to rub it in my nose, didn't you? Listen, May. Not all of us want to live our whole lives stuffing our brains full of boring shit we'll never need to know again." Madison couldn't have cut out May's heart more effectively if she'd used actual knives. But the orchestra kids laughed. Probably that was the whole point. She looked at her twin, her best friend, her secret keeper, and realized Madison was none of those things anymore. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I thought you were someone else." She turned away and cast around for an escape. Her debate advisor, Ms. Greenberg, put a hand on her arm. "Do you need help finding your parents?" she asked. "No," May said. "I just—" Her eyes strayed to Madison despite herself. Ms. Greenberg's face tightened up. "Something on your mind?" "I thought we were friends," May said. I thought she was like me." "There aren't a lot of kids like you, May," Ms. Greenberg said. She shook her head. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but I've been teaching for 23 years, and I've learned that some kids aren't cut out for making anything of themselves. They may have lots of potential, but that doesn't mean a thing if they won't keep climbing, just to see how high they can go." "Oh," May said. "But May, you're not like that. You've got what it takes to really make something of yourself. You have drive, and that's worlds more important than potential. You're never willing to settle for just good enough. It can be lonely at your age, but trust me, the world needs special people like you. May mulled this over. She'd heard a lot of this before in some shape or another. How she was special, academically talented, gifted. All those keywords that meant really smart and good at school. But usually it was framed to tell her how everyone was special in some way or another. No adult had ever breathed this dark truth, that maybe some people were less special, and especially not Madison. Maybe May was better off on her own. No dead weight holding her back. Ms. Greenberg stretched high and waved across the auditorium. I see your parents. Go on, make them buy you some ice cream. May winced. If only she could just go out and eat regular ice cream. Can't, May said, half apologetic. But thanks. She trudged toward them and their annual sunflower bouquet. They offered to take her to get vegan coconut ice candy, like Filipino ice pops, from the new food truck that was somehow, miraculously, completely safe for May. We should celebrate all your hard work, her dad said. Live a little, May, said her mom. Take the night off. We'll give you all the sugar and movies you can stand. May was tempted, but only for a split second. Other kids had potential, but she had drive. Another time, May told them. I still have to study for finals, and I need to get up early to go for a run. Jingwei was right. The second raft build didn't take nearly as long, though they had some trouble conveying to Sparky that they needed to cut down a different kind of tree. And then underwent an uncertain hour of experimenting with pieces of wood in different sizes and from different kinds of trees to find the one that seemed to be the lightest. And then another hour, untying the knots in the first raft to recover the pieces of Gabe's pants, which ultimately left May's fingers cramped and wrinkled. After that, though, construction happened rapidly, and they were done by mid-afternoon. The new raft floated nicely. It was moored in place with a few long poles, saplings really, pushed deep into the riverbed. So who goes first? May asked. Do all of us just climb on? Or do we take trips? Or what? That thing can't ride in the raft with us, Inez said, her chin obstinate. I am not getting that close to it. It was like one of those riddles, May thought, with a farmer, a wolf, a rabbit, and a carrot, and you had to figure out how to get them all across the river with nobody getting eaten. She didn't look at Sparky, but a lot of eyes turned to Jingwei. Yeah, good call, Jingwei said, unflustered. I don't think anything we built could support that much weight anyhow. She thumbed Sparky's shell. Do you have a plan to get across, bud? Sparky walked toward the riverbank and straight into the water, disappearing from view entirely. The kids stared after it. Guess he's waterproof, sparks and all, Jingwei said at last. Or maybe we're done with it for good, Inez said. That would be a plus. Jingwei winced at that and stared a little while longer into the water where Sparky had vanished. Well, all aboard, she said. Let's see what we've got. The kids clambered on in ones and twos, wading through the knee-deep water and pulling themselves up into the raft. It rocked dangerously under each new addition, settling a little lower into the water each time. Spread out, May said. We need to distribute our weight evenly so it doesn't tip over. The kids eased themselves into a ring around the edge of the raft. Talon glided above them in a wide loop. By the time Hiram helped to pull Alex on board, it was clear the raft really was going to hold everybody. Are we ready? Inez asked. Agreement echoed from the group. Okay then. Inez took a deep breath. Hang on tight. Here goes nothing. She pulled one of the poles out from the riverbank and passed it across the raft so they could use it to steer. Saya grabbed one too, and so did Amelia and Hiram. The current pushed them downstream, slowly at first. They pushed the poles against the bottom of the river to bring them closer to the far side. Wow, this might actually work, Sebastian said. His knuckles were white, where he clung to the scraps of Gabe's old pants, holding the raft together. He must be one of the ones who couldn't swim, May concluded. And then Inez began to swear furiously. "What's wrong?" May asked. "It's too deep here," Inez said. "The poles don't reach the bottom." They drifted toward the center of the river, going faster and faster. The water grew choppier. The raft careened from wave to wave, crashing into each new crest and then dropping. Worst roller coaster ever, May thought. "We're gonna die," Sebastian moaned. He was looking distinctly green under that pasty skin of his. "We're going to get out of this," Inez snapped. "We'll find a way." "Do you hear that?" Amelia asked. It was still hard to hear over the constant rushing of the river. But the distant whirring noise was growing louder. And finally, as the raft spiraled its way around a bend, its source came into view. It was a huge, dark shadow squatting across the entire river. A dam? The water churned through gaps in the structure, and inside those gaps were enormous pieces of metal. If the raft got all the way to the dam, May realized, they'd be chewed up by those turbines. She had to make a plan. There had to be a plan. "Pull the raft!" she shouted. She plunged over the edge of the raft and into the river. Saya screamed. May grabbed onto the edge of one of the logs and pulled as hard as she could. "Someone help me!" She inhaled a little water and coughed. Inez hesitated on the edge, but not for long. She jumped into the water next to her and did the same as May, grabbing onto the ties that held the raft together and trying to pull it toward the far bank. "Some of you kick from the other side," May called. Hiram jumped in too and did his best to push. Amelia and Gabe lay with their bellies on the raft, kicking like the world's least efficient outboard motors. They couldn't keep the raft from moving downstream. But slowly, the raft moved toward the other side too. They were 2/3 across the river, 4/5 across. They were going to make it. May's arms burned from the effort. Her ears were full of water. Her sinuses stung. But none of that mattered, because she had a job to do, and she was going to get it done no matter what. The raft began to pull apart. May hoisted herself onto it, just to her elbows, to catch her breath, and so did Inez. The raft swirled closer and closer to the dam. Sebastian started to cry. "We've got you! We've got all of you!" Inez sounded desperate, not soothing. May studied how the raft was failing. They weren't going to be able to hold all of it together, or do a quick patch job. But maybe they wouldn't have to. There were 2 logs still tightly bound together. The rest were splitting away. She waved Sebastian toward the safe spot. "Here, come over here. All you have to do is hold on, and we'll get you back to land." She coaxed him into lying belly down on the safe side. "Everyone, get away from that end," May said. "Hurry, hurry!" One by one, those who could swim, or at least weren't petrified like Sebastian, all settled into the water. Everyone kept one or both hands on the wood, kicking and paddling furiously. The larger part of the raft split away for good. "Let it go!" May shouted. It careened downstream. The kids made slow, steady progress toward the riverbank. The current swept them closer to the dam, but the edge of the river was closer still. The abandoned logs struck one of the dam's support beams with a sharp crack. They finished breaking apart as they hit one of the whirring turbines. Then they bobbed and went under, lodging themselves in the turbine, jamming it. A high whining sound began, the shrill of a stuck motor. Black smoke rose from somewhere inside it, along with a terrible, acrid scent. Then a horrible, keening chirp, a sound that could only be an alarm. Finally, they washed up on the far edge of the river, spent and half drowned. But they still weren't safe. "Let's get out of here before something comes to check out that alarm," Jingwei said. For once, nobody argued with her. No one had much strength to travel after that, but but they went as far as they could drag themselves, until Amelia practically collapsed where she stood. It still wasn't far enough. But there wasn't such a thing as far enough. Not really. They settled in a meadow of thigh-high flowers that smelled like cinnamon and almonds. As they made camp for the night, May went back to stare downhill at the river. Just a shining orange ribbon from here. Gabe trailed after her. The evening was glorious, golden and warm. Dragonflies darted from blossom to blossom. Gabe plucked one of the flowers, something red-orange, the size of a teacup, and tucked it behind her ear. May tried to smile. She wanted to smile. Everything about this was dizzying and beautiful. The sunset, the field, the boy. But that little voice in the back of May's head was shouting at her, asking what she thought she was doing, where she thought she was going. What was the plan here? What was her goal? None of this was Gabe's fault exactly, but they weren't chosen for each other. They hadn't been chosen at all. It was a delusion, an accident. No, worse than that. It was pointless. "Are you all right?" he asked her, yet again. "You seem a little wound up." He took her hand. His palm was warm, pressed against hers. Something solid and certain. Another delusion. Some people might have been good at cushioning the blow, or chosen their words carefully in a show of false diplomacy. May felt that being indirect would have been an act of disrespect. "We should break up," she said. They were quiet together, holding hands in the field of flowers as the light began to fade. She wondered if he'd put up an argument. He squeezed her fingers instead. "I had a feeling." Gabe's eyes were shining. May thought he'd look away from her, but he held her eyes steady, just like he held her hands in his. "May, this thing we have is good and right. I don't know what's going on in that brain of yours," he said, "but I can see you're lost in there. Once you find your way out, I'll be right here waiting." May's fingers slipped through his, and her hand fell to her side. "Let's get back to the others," she said. "There's a lot of work to do." This has been Remade. Season 2, Episode 7. Chosen One. Written by Andrea Phillips. Narrated by Laurel Schroeder. Audio produced by Amanda Rose Smith. Musical theme by Amanda Rose Smith. Copyright 2017, Serial Box Publishing. Production copyright 2017, Serial Box Publishing.